Congressman Bob Good joins us in the studio right now. You're running for re-election in the 5th District. Thank you for being here. State Senator John McGuire is also running against you, but last year, before he was elected, he was singing your praises, and he was doing it here.
And I'm wondering if you would pledge to not run against Bob Good next year.
Well, number one, Bob Good's doing a great job. He's a true conservative, and we need more of them.
Yeah.
And I'm a true conservative. My pledge to you is I'm running for Virginia State Senate, and I'm going to support Bob Good for re-election.
Do you have any idea what changed in the weeks and months after he was elected when he said he was going to pledge his support to you?
My opponent is a perpetual candidate in search of a race. He's relentlessly running all the time. He literally took his state Senate signs and taped over state Senate and put Congress on them, just left them up after he finished running. He's run for as many as 4 things in 1 year. I've run for 2 things in my lifetime, both of which I was asked to run by others. County supervisor right here in Campbell and ran for Congress for the first time in 2020. So my opponent knew he could not win the Senate nomination unless he pretended to be for me. So multiple times over, he lied to people throughout the campaign that he was supportive of me, that he would serve out his Senate term. And then, Mark, before he gets sworn in November, before he's even sworn in January, he declares to run against me. If he had any integrity, which he does not, I've never run against someone with less integrity than my opponent, but if he had any integrity, he would resign from the Senate, wouldn't he? If you declare in November, before you're sworn in January, you have no interest in being a state senator, you'd think you would resign so that somebody who actually wanted to be a state senator could serve in that capacity.
What would you say to that voter who was asking him to pledge his support to you, and now we see that he's running against you?
Well, it's a really dangerous combination when you have someone with unchecked, blind ambition who's relentlessly pursuing what they think is the next rung on the political ladder, who also has no integrity. His whole campaign is based on lies. He lied to the voters. Every allegation and attack against me is a lie. When you have ambition with no integrity and millions of dark Washington, California money that's funding his campaign, trying to steal this election from the voters of the 5th District, trying to persuade them with distortions and dishonesty and smear attacks, that's a dangerous combination.
Yeah, a lot of those ads are coming after you. They're spending a lot of money against you, like this ad right here.
McGuire hunted down terrorists abroad, then built a SEAL training company from scratch. Now he's running because Trump doesn't need another backstabber in Congress.
How do you respond to that? What does that mean to you when he calls you a backstabber?
Well, that's just silly. That's the whole basis of his campaign. You know, I supported President Trump in 2016. I supported him in 2020. I voted to object to the electors that I thought were in question in January of 21, as you know. I signed on to the amicus brief more recently, Ted Cruz's amicus brief, to ensure that President Trump could be on the ballot going forward. I always said that I would support him enthusiastically if he was our nominee. I endorsed him in January. I support him enthusiastically now. And people across the 5th District know that.
You did support, though, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, right, first, and then you switched after DeSantis dropped out. And there's an ad running that shows you talking to someone about being a little hesitant about supporting the former president.
I've never been caught on camera trashing President Trump.
You're asking me privately. I should say this. I can't sit by and watch the Henry's threat that we nominated Trump.
Well, I was for Governor DeSantis back in May a year ago. I was never against President Trump. Even when I endorsed Governor DeSantis, I said, you know, I think that we need 8 years. I was concerned about the legal persecution of the president, the lawfare that's been waged against him. I've always believed he would be exonerated in appeal. But you got a crooked court in Atlanta going after him, a crooked court in New York going after him, and I was concerned the impact that it would have. It's had the opposite effect. It has rallied the base around him. Republicans overwhelmingly support him. Even independent swing voters, moderates, know this is a rigged attack on President Trump. It is abuse of power by the Biden Department of Justice, which has literally colluded with these prosecutors in New York and Atlanta to go after the president. Think about just the gag order, Mark. A gag order is supposed to protect the accused from abuse by the prosecutors. In this case, they've put a gag order on President Trump to try to keep him from being able to defend himself because there's a presumption of guilt by these crooked courts, these crooked judges, these crooked prosecutors who are persecuting the president. Ultimately, absolutely be overturned in court, or in appeal, I should say. But so I know I strongly support President Trump just as I did in 16 and 20. People across the 5th District know that.
But what do you say to those people who believe that your lukewarm support of him back before, kind of, they're wondering, where do you stand now?
Well,
Why are you changing?
I've never stopped saying that President Trump was the best president of my lifetime, and that I would enthusiastically support him as our nominee, as I am doing now. I'm doing everything I can to help him get elected. Matter of fact, I was the leader against the recent effort by the gentlelady from Georgia to try to remove our speaker because I said it would hurt President Trump's reelection.
And we're going to talk about that. She did try to oust the speaker. You didn't vote to do that this time, but you did for Kevin McCarthy. What's the difference? What changed?
Well, it's funny because my opponent, who's criticized, and he was for the removal of McCarthy before he was against the removal of McCarthy, just like he was for me before he was against me. But his number one supporter is the lady from Georgia who led the charge trying to remove Speaker Johnson, of course, which was overwhelmingly defeated. But that's the kind of people supporting my opponent. But the difference is that we now have a 2-vote margin, and we're 6 months from an election. So it's simple math and it's simple calendar.
So what does that mean? That you can't deny doing what you would like to do, maybe? Because obviously you've said some things that are not in favor of the speaker. I mean, they're passing bills that are spending a lot of money, a lot of
well,
taxpayer dollars.
There's a difference between whether or not you support the speaker or you think the speaker's doing a good job.
Do you think the speaker's doing a good job?
Let me answer the question for you. There's a difference between whether or not you support the speaker and whether or not you think he's doing a good job and whether or not you think he should be removed. In other words, what the strategy should be to address it. With Kevin McCarthy, he represented 12 years of failed Republican leadership, and we did not believe he represented the change that was needed. And so he made a bunch of commitments last January, 16 months ago, to become Speaker. He committed to cutting spending back to pre-COVID levels for the bills we brought to the floor, didn't do that. He promised to bring all 12 spending bills to the floor for a vote, didn't do that. He promised that we wouldn't pass legislation with a majority of Democrat votes. He didn't do that. He promised that we would vote on term limits. He didn't do that. He promised that we would vote on a balanced budget. He didn't do that. He promised that we would impeach Mayorkas. He didn't do that. He promised he would release the January 6 tapes. He didn't do that. And so some of us felt like that track of the spending and the border invasion and Republicans not being willing to fight for those things to make change was unsustainable. But that was not, again, 6 months before an election, and it wasn't with a 2-vote margin. We had a 9-vote margin back then. And literally now you're in a much more dangerous situation where you could have a uniparty speaker, you could have someone who is even more inclined to work with Democrats because of the way that Democrats and Republicans have joined together to pass these massive spending bills. So it's just not the time to do it. But what I have said consistently is we'll have a speaker battle in November. I don't support Speaker Johnson. I don't think he can win again, but we shouldn't do it now.
All right, so he'll have your support at least until November.
Well, I didn't say he has my support. I said I don't think he should be removed, and we ought to have that contest in November.
All right, and ad supporting your opponent says you voted against a border security bill that had a lot of bipartisan support, like this ad here.
Bob Good voted against funding our border security, opposed billions for ICE, opposed millions for new technology, opposed thousands of new border agents. Bob Good voted against all of it.
You were against that bill and it failed, right?
Yeah, that's just another silly ad. Everybody knows that I've been a leader on the fight for border security. I've been to the border 6 times during my 3 years in Congress. I have fought for the Speaker to include border security in the spending bills. He refused to do that. I fought with the Speaker to not do Ukraine funding without border security, as he promised not to do. Unfortunately, he didn't listen to that and he failed us. So what you'll have my opponent do, when you vote against a $1 trillion spending bill, which has tens of thousands of different things, he'll cherry pick some things that sound good to say you voted against this. And what he's referring to here, there was the so-called border security bill, which was really a Ukraine funding package combined with amnesty masquerading as a border security bill. It would have made it worse. There's a reason why Democrats were claiming to support it. It would have actually given political cover to the very people perpetrating the border invasion. It would have allowed 5,000 illegals into the country every day before Biden was supposed to deal with it and call it a crisis. And it would have allowed him to parole as many as he wanted beyond the 5,000. It would have given work permits to those who are here illegally legally, essentially amnesty. It wouldn't have required deportation of anyone. It wouldn't have required any border wall to be completed until 2028, long after Biden was out of office. So it was a phony border security bill designed to give political cover to the Democrats perpetrating the border invasion.
But it did have some bipartisan support. Did the former president ever get involved?
Let me let you in a little secret. Let me let you in a little secret. Some moderate Republican rhinos actually don't want to do the things they say they want to do, and they'll join with Democrats and lie to the American people about it. Those are the kind of people that are supporting my opponent, by the way.
And you know, some people are calling you a rhino, but particularly your opponent.
That's only people with an agenda who are lying in order to try to reach for the next rung on the political ladder. Say I'm too conservative, Mark. Say I fight the Democrats too hard. Say that I challenge my Republican colleagues who lie to the American people, who run as conservatives and then vote like moderates. Those would be legitimate criticism. I don't think the people in the 5th District are bothered by that. That's why they voted for me overwhelmingly in 2022, the first time I ran for re-election, and I think they're going to vote for me overwhelmingly this time, too.
Did the former president get involved in this border security bill battle and contact people and tell them not to vote for it because it would be a win for the president?
The president's appropriate, righteous position, President Trump's position, was this is a phony border security bill that's really an amnesty bill that would make things worse. What it would have done is put into law policies entrenching Biden's border invasion that would have made it more difficult for President Trump and a Republican House and a Senate to secure the border next year. So, of course, President Trump, like all good Republicans, was against that bad bill, and that's why it failed in the Senate.
All right, listen, college campuses in Virginia and around the country are seeing a lot of demonstrations over the Israel-Hamas war. Most people agree that anti-Semitism, wherever it is ugly and wrong, no matter where it's happening. Congress now looking at pulling funding from colleges and universities that aren't doing enough to reject that anti-Semitism. Is that an appropriate response, defunding some of these colleges and universities?
The 1964 Civil Rights Act requires colleges who receive federal funding, and all these colleges do, to protect their students from discrimination based on race and religion. And these college campuses, these presidents, and as you know, I'm on the Ed and Workforce Committee, so I've been at the forefront of holding these hearings and holding these presidents accountable at Columbia, at MIT, at Harvard, and so forth, who are not just allowing it to happen. In many cases, the administration, the staff, and the faculty are supporting not just the anti-Israel demonstrations, not just the anti-Semitic demonstrations, but literally pro-Hamas, pro-terrorist demonstrations on their campuses. And they're not bringing consequence to those students who are creating a hostile, threatening, intimidation environment on their campuses, which is a direct violation of the 1964 federal civil rights legislation. So yes, we ought to cut federal funding for these college campuses that are supposed to be the elites, by the way. They are not the elites, but are supposed to be the elites who are letting this happen on their campuses.
Is it okay, though, for them to protest, just not be violent about it? Is that what you're saying?
Thankfully, we live in a country where we have First Amendment rights to express our views, to assemble, to protest peacefully, but you don't have the ability you don't have the right to shut down a campus, to block access to a campus, to take over buildings, to resist law enforcement, to get violent. And these are not just protests, these are riots. And frankly, they're funded by these far left groups who are funding the same thing in these big cities. These are pro-Iran, pro-Hamas organized groups that are funding these. The FBI needs to stop going after parents at school board meetings, stop going after pro-life protesters, stop going after people who are exercising their Second Amendment rights, and investigate who's funding these groups, what's happening on these college campuses, where, as you know, many of the people protesting aren't even students on those campuses. They are professional protesters who are funded by these groups that are anti-American, and it's a shame that these college campuses are letting it happen, and yes, they should lose their federal funding when they're allowing anti-Semitic demonstrations in hostile environments to Jewish students on their campuses.
All right, Donald Trump continues to take credit for the overturning of Roe v. Wade. The former president has suggested he'd support a national ban on abortion around 15 weeks. You feel similarly?
Well, Roe v. Wade was the only decision in the history of our country, Supreme Court decision, that cost over 60 million lives. Think about that. We have 60 million less Americans today in our country than we would have had if there was no Roe v. Wade decision. And that means many less doctors? How many less first responders? How many less teachers? How many less scientists? How many less law enforcement officers? How many less firefighters? How many less people contributing to our economy, contributing to our country, making us stronger? And we're suffering as a result of that today, by the way. Abortion is the #1 killer in the United States. About 1 million a year. Abortion, let me say it again, is the #1 killer in the United States. And so we've got to battle as a country for the hearts and the souls and to change hearts and minds, to have a culture of life and compassion for women who get in difficult situations. That's why my wife and I for decades have supported crisis pregnancy centers in our community and around our district. However, we ought to come together and protect also innocent, precious life in the womb. And I've always been, as you know, someone who has stood for life at conception, unashamedly, unapologetically. Some things, Mark, should transcend politics. It's our responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The least among us, the most vulnerable among us, and that is precious, innocent life in the womb. And I will always continue to fight.
Even in cases of rape and incest.
Well, we've always, almost everyone agrees, and you didn't say the third one, that's really, and by the way, that is a less than 1% of all abortions. That's the red herring that the media and the left and the Democrats go to. There's 99% of abortions that have nothing to do with rape or incest or life of the mother, health of the mother. However, and we ought to have it, we recognize that sometimes there has to be early delivery because a life is at stake, that's not abortion. But when it comes to those difficult, challenging, most horrible life situations that people find themselves in.
Rape or incest?
Those situations which all of us have seen around us. Again, it's less than 1% of abortions. I have never seen a situation where killing the child makes it better.
Okay.
I've never met anyone who said, gosh, we had the child, we chose life, and I wish we didn't. And I've never met anyone whose mother chose life in a difficult situation, and they were born, and they wish that their mother had chose abortion.
Okay. Supreme Court is considering whether Donald Trump is entitled to immunity from criminal prosecution for alleged official acts while he was in the White House. How do you see it? Should he be?
This is abuse of power by the Department of Injustice under Joe Biden. You literally, again, have prosecutors that have worked in the Department of Justice and are now working on these cases in Atlanta and in New York. You've got where the gentleman in Atlanta who was working for Fani Willis, her former boyfriend, was literally billing the taxpayers of in Atlanta for going to meet with Joe Biden's Department of Justice. 16 hours he billed them. Again, you've got a gag order on President Trump trying to keep him from being able to make his appeal to the public, to criticize what's going on in that court. A gag order is supposed to keep the prosecution from incriminating the witness publicly. It's not, the defendant publicly. It's not intended to try to keep the defendant from being able to defend themselves publicly. What recourse does he have? He needs to be able to stand up for himself.
So he should have
This
immunity.
is abuse of power against a political opponent. There's no way President Trump would be in charge with these ridiculous business records, inaccurate business records is what he's being accused of. He's being accused of that he overstated his assets in New York. No one was harmed in that. The loans were paid. The financial institutions made money. I used to work for a financial institution. When someone presents to us what they think their assets are, they estimate the value of their home and their assets. It's up to us to decide the value on how much we want to lend on those assets. The burden is not on the person who's representing what they think it's worth. These are ridiculous, trumped-up charges because he's going to be the next president. It's abuse of power. It's designed to keep him off the campaign trail. It's designed to hurt him financially, so all the resources are being spent to defend himself. So the president will ultimately be exonerated, and he's going to win in November.
But the question is, should he have immunity from prosecution for alleged
for
criminal
official acts that he
while in the White House?
What criminal acts? There's no.
I said alleged.
There's no legitimate allegations of criminal acts while he was president. But yes, the president, just like Congress, should not suffer.
Any president
should not suffer. The president should not suffer for what he does in his official capacity. A president or a member, we have this protection as a member of Congress. I don't have to worry that in my official capacity, I'm going to be prosecuted for what I do as a member of Congress.
A lot of people say, well, that could mean that he could have a political rival shot and killed, and he would be immune to that.
I think we're being silly here, Mark.
Okay. All right.
And the American people know it. That's why he's ahead in the polls, and that's why he's going to be elected in November.
Okay. Gun violence. Mass shootings always grab our attention, as you're aware, especially when assault weapons are used. What's the best response you as a lawmaker can have when people say that it's time to ban certain weapons, especially assault
I
weapons?
object to the term. There's no such thing as gun violence. Guns don't cause violence any more than there's baseball bat violence or there's any other kind of inanimate object that is violent. It's not true. Bottom line is, shall not be infringed. We have the right as law-abiding citizens to bear arms, to defend ourselves, and that to not be infringed. What we need to do is to stop undermining our police and our law enforcement. We need to stop having prosecutors who are not prosecuting violent criminals. We need to stop having no cash bail where we arrest people and then release them. We need to stop releasing violent offenders. You've got a Democrat Party. You're seeing, just look at any blue city where there's hundreds of people shot every weekend in Chicago and in Baltimore, and it's not talked about. It's not even reported on. I bet you all in this station never talk about the violence in these big blue cities and the people that are killed every weekend, because it doesn't fit the narrative of whatever you want to call or describe as gun violence. But it's black on black crime in these big blue cities because of these lax Democrat policies. This is what they want to do to the country because they're weak on crime. They're tough on law enforcement instead of on criminal. They're pro-criminal instead of pro-victim. And again, they got these no cash bail policies. They're not arresting violent criminals. They're letting those out who are incarcerated. And that's what's happening, and that's what we need to stand against.
All right. Congressman Bob Good, thank you for coming in and speaking with us.
Thank you, Mark.
Appreciate it.